Hello, and welcome to session 8 of Strings of Passion. There's 7 strings of passion, and we are on session 8, which means we are going to talk about...
We're going to integrate.
Exactly. That's perfect. Integrate, including our conversation. I'm Deborah Henson-Conant, and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley, and this is called Jung at Harp, and we call it that because it is, we both are harp players. You can see Kathleen's harp in the back, and you can see mine here. We probably won't be playing them, but they're here. And Kathleen is a Jungian analyst, and I'm a composer and a performer who has lived my life really thinking about creativity and what it takes to get from creative impulse to creative expression. I've come up with 7 principles that are part of my class and the book that I'm working on called The 7 Strings of Passion. We've gone through those strings, and now we're going to talk about the integration of them. And something I'm really interested in talking about today is the idea of recovery or reclaiming. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I want to talk about that is that I sense that that we can spend our lives trying to achieve and get better. And yet I noticed that with my students, we were talking about this the other day, that it wasn't, you can expand your envelope and get out of your comfort zone. But when you're connecting with people, you really want to be in your comfort zone. You really want to be investing in being in that comfort zone and bringing people in, as well as pushing the envelope. But in performance, we often, or in exploring performance, we often don't explore what is that comfort zone? Who are we? Right. How can we be more of that we are?
Right. Well, I think what you're alluding to, Deborah, is how does someone bring their whole self to what they're doing? And in this case, we're talking about it with music, but it's really in any life event. How do we bring all of who we are? And all of us suffer from where we've kind of lost parts of ourselves in the past because they got criticized, they got judged, they got labeled as wrong or bad, or something happened and we got scared of those impulses. And so our primitive psyche, without even conscious choice, just kind of shut the door on it and locked it, or it kind of split it off. I have this wonderful diagram that I use oftentimes when I'm presenting that's like a mandala. So it's a circle with all these parts. And for simplicity, think of it like a pie chart.
Right.
And so wholeness is where all of those pie slices are connected to the center of the pie and contained in the pie shell. Well, what happens automatically, kind of as a self-defense mechanism, again, that's very unconscious and primitive, is some of those pie slices that represent bits of ourself can get split up. So instead of being contained in the whole pie, they're out floating around. And the problem is when they're out floating around, if we get caught in them because they form around strong affects, then we have nothing else, no access to the rest of us to help ground that emotion or ground that thought. And we're just like drowning in it. So recovery and reconnecting is about bringing those parts back into the whole of who we are.
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, first of all, when I started working on Strings of Passion and started building, worksheets for the students in the class, I immediately created a pie chart. Mm-hmm. And every single, or mandala or whatever, this circle, for every single thing that we're looking at, I looked at it in terms of these 7 strings, and then always a middle that was vibrant with color. Mm-hmm. And this was purely just spontaneous to do that. So it's really interesting that that's how you, and is this a diagram that you created?
No, this is actually a diagram that a therapist by the name of David Kaloff, who I went to a workshop of his 30 years ago. He was based out of Seattle, Washington at the time, and he was an expert on what at that time was called multiple personality disorder, or what is now known as dissociative identity disorder, which Jung and all the psychoanalysts know that dissociation is a normal psychic mechanism we all experience. it's the degree to which something gets dissociated, or for instance, the pie sliver gets away from the whole,
Right.
that determines how problematic the dissociation is, or if the dissociation is severe enough to get labeled as a, quote, mental illness, unquote. But we all dissociate. We all kind of leave ourselves at times. That's, again, it's a normal phenomena. But anyway, David Kaloff designed this diagram, and it's just really stuck with me. And I tried finding him a few months ago and couldn't find him. So my guess is he may no longer be with us.
Okay.
But yeah.
So you just said something. Dissociation. So it's the degree to which well, we're all dissociating. So seems to be a normal human thing,
right?
Some kind of function. And it is the degree to which we're dissociating. So can you describe dissociation? And then I just want to try to understand it in terms of, like, for instance, I know that one of the things that has, so in my trajectory with the harp, I used to play the big concert harp. I felt very disconnected. I couldn't move it around. I couldn't move around with it. I was behind it. It was beautiful. I was, comparing myself to it. And so I ended up inventing an instrument that I could wear. I don't know about inventing. I mean, it's said that I've invented it. It was just like, seemed obvious to me. Yes, of course. Shrink it down, strap it on, plug it in, so that I can connect with it. So that it can be more of a prosthetic, meaning a part of my voice that just was missing, or part of myself that is missing. So it feels like it's a part of myself. And I noticed that many of and people will say that to me, oh, it seems like you and the instrument are one. It's like you're a centaur, or, some kind of chimera instrument, animal. And I noticed that when my students are struggling, it's often that they're disconnected. They're disconnected from the shapes, so that there's that, in learning, we're disconnected and we learn to connect. We learn the shape makes sense, the shape's natural. Then the shape just becomes part of our personal expression. So the learning is that way. But what I'm hearing you say about disassociation is we can have a connection with something in our lives or who we are, and then that starts to disassociate. So my experience of wholeness with an instrument is of becoming more and more and more one with it. And I think I hear you saying that there is an experience where we are becoming less and less and less one with who we actually are. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think we may be using dissociation a little bit differently at this point.
Okay, cool. Tell me. Yeah.
Yeah, but to follow what you're saying, we all have an impulse of feeling like self, like who am I? And Freud, as well as all the other psychoanalysts and theorists, agree that our sense of ego, or little less self, as Jung would say, starts in the body. The first sense of self we have as an infant toddler is all body-based. So what happened for you is that impulse of who am I as a harpist and musician flowed outward to want to have that sense of the harp. I am the harp and the harp is me. And some people in a spiritual way might say, I'm a harp that the creator plays, and then I am the created that plays the harp. But that there's somewhere that it's like a holographic oneness, we might talk about it. Dissociation, as I was using it a little bit earlier, is a much more primitive, decentering kind of process. Whereas your experience of strapping the harp on brought you more back to your center. So if we go back to your pie charts, or my pie charts, or mandalas, which, by the way, do appear spontaneously. So your drawing of the pie charts was a way you were spontaneously, as you were creating the strings of passion, integrating them and helping and seeing how we could really start at any one point here and go through these strings. I'm looking at my little sheet here with them.
Right.
So that somewhere, your impulse took you through, came from that impulse of oneness. Who am I? And that oneness and that wanting that sense of oneness with your heart, which you experience when you shrunk it down and strapped it on versus sitting behind a humongous pedal harp
Right.
that had already probably created some primitive dissociation to even move because it's so heavy.
Right.
So, in order to do it, again, primitive psyche just helps you kind of temporarily leave your body a little bit so you don't feel the stress and strain on your body. See, that's kind of a healthy manifestation of dissociation.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? You can go on with what you're saying, but
yeah.
I definitely want to.
Again, dissociation's graded. So when we daydream and I'm sitting in a class or a seminar and I'm starting to, get restless and all of a sudden I'm somewhere else in my mind's eye, that's also a form of dissociation. Again, it's not pathological, but what gets pathological is usually where people have very, very early traumas that they were so body-based and they had no cognitive capacity, or they didn't have enough sense of self to be able to understand what was happening and process the emotion that came up. And there was no adult around to help them do it. So it's usually those kinds of experiences that get split off so far out of contact with the ego, the pie chart that's missing 3 pieces, that it becomes what we might call pathological.
Now, how would we know if we're pathological?
Well, so I'm using a word I don't even like.
Okay, all right, okay.
And I guess I'm talking about it that way for people who are watching who may have a mental health background,
okay,
or and may think of it that way, think in those terms. For me, and as a Jungian analyst, I believe everything that's manifesting in our life is manifesting in an attempt to help the self survive. And so that the degree for me, if we're going to make it, quote, label it pathological, is where it keeps us from living the fullness of who we are. But that's not necessarily a mainstream mental health diagnosis.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, viewpoint.
Right. I mean, there are different ways of thinking. But for me, what's important is that we reconnect, we recover these bits of ourselves that have automatically gotten deconstructed, if we go to the 6th string, that happened primitively, which means it's left hanging out there disconnected to the whole. And we want to bring it back because it's a pocket of energy we need. It's a pocket of our life force.
Well, I want to talk about that, and I want to go to something I think I heard you say, which was that everything that's manifested, meaning everything we manifest, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, is done so in a way to help us survive.
Yes.
So if we continue to manifest poverty, or if we continue to manifest, I'm not with a partner, romantic, I don't have a romantic partner. Can you say, is that what you're saying? Sorry, is that what you're saying, that we're manifesting those things in a way to for who we think we are to survive?
Yes. Yes. And it's not even just who we think we are, but it is even a much more bodily based who we have experienced ourselves as being.
Oh.
So if it were all head driven, it would be much easier to change.
Right.
But it's really more that what happens is we kind of keep recreating inadvertently based out of our experience. And so getting at the experience, this is often why affirmations don't have effect, because they're words, but they're not getting at the felt sense or the experience that has to be owned in order to move beyond it. It's paradox. We have to own these bits of ourselves in order to be able to have something different.
I get it. No, I get it.
Yeah.
And what it's reminding me of is, I know that I've heard about in 12-step that there's the concept of self-seeking, that it is seeking this part out that maybe, just like you said, the part of ourselves that we feel ourselves to be, we keep manifesting those things until we understand that it's there.
Yes, yeah. And, the psychological term for that is projection. So we have these split off bits of ourselves. Let's just say we keep getting in relationship with someone who's critical and kind of passive aggressive towards us. Well, until we deal with that part of us that's passive aggressive and critical towards us, we will keep entering into relationship with someone who's passive aggressive and critical of us. And it is primitive psyche's way of trying to help us know that part of ourselves. But it's all unconscious. It's not like there's the ego is saying, oh, I'm going to do this. It's all unconscious.
Wow. It's almost reminding me of, the urge of all things to procreate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like I've always thought of that as a biological, construct or whatever it is. But now it's starting to sound like almost as like a psychological or I don't know.
I would say it's a spiritual principle. The alchemists say as within, so without, and as above, so below, that the laws are the same on every plane.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid noticing, I was thinking, what makes us human? What makes us, and I kept noticing that one of the things that was really different between me and my cat or that me as a human is that my cat is that humans will copy something. Like humans will copy, the way that their parents speak. Hello and hello. A cat won't do that. A cat doesn't have the impulse to copy. It just doesn't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we do. Like it seems to be an impulse. Maybe I'm going way up. This may be the session where we go all over a field. But is that relevant here at all? This human impulse to copy?
Well, I think it's relevant in that's just part of how we're hardwired, and that's part of how we learn. So it's instinctive, it's automatic. Again, it's not that we even think it and do it. Now maybe as we get older, we want to learn something, we think, okay, I'm going to do it like she's doing it. Mm-hmm. But, from birth to 6 years old, we're not thinking that. It's just happening automatically.
Right. So
it's an instinctive impulse, meaning
exactly.
It's automatic. It's not anything we decide to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. All right. So I just wanted to check. Okay. So we were talking about recreating these things and as inside, so out, which is one of the big things that I discovered as I, first when I was figuring out the strings of passion, I was just, what are the principles that take you from creative impulse to creative expression? What are they? Break it down, deconstruct it. And then as I broke it down and started exploring it and teaching it and observing it in my own life, that's when I began to really profoundly experience this as within, so without, and began to realize that it's almost like my chest was the edge of a mirror, and whatever I'm doing on the outside is mirrored on the inside, and so within as without, and that this creative resonance begins to take place. And I will play, if I am stuttering and judgmental of myself on the inside, I will play in a stuttering and judgmental way on the outside. And yet I can affect that by making choices. For just as simple as saying, slow down, and as you approach with more care, that could start to teach both the inside and the outside. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I'm stuck with that. Right. It could have an effect, or I could also fantasize or imagine slowing down and being connected with what I do, and that would affect what's on the outside.
Right.
And I think that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. That's that principle at work, as within and so without. Part of, for me, the beauty of your strings of passion is it gives people and the ego, the self, a system to work through internally to have confidence and to connect with their own center around a piece of music, whether it's a learned piece or an improv, so that when they sit down, they can be in their beingness, in their center enough that process can happen. The lift off can happen. It can move from here to the harp.
Right.
So that there can be a lift off from what's within oneself. I think this is why it's so important that in all of my own harp career, everybody says you've got to listen to the song and be able to hear it in your head and sing it to yourself before you can play it.
Right.
To really play it musically. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here, is we internalize it. And once it's within us, then it can flow outward to the harp. There can be the liftoff. The liftoff in this case from inner to outer.
Right. That's interesting because especially when I teach blues, because I noticed it there, that and because blues is such a repetitive form, therefore it's really easy to internalize, or can be easy to internalize, that the music is there without the sound.
Yes.
The piece exists whether you are playing it with your hands or you're not playing with your hands.
Right.
And I notice it especially with the blues, because if you're playing the blues and you get lost, the blues continues. And you can jump back in at any point, not jump back in as in, oh, it stopped here and I jumped in, but it kept going and then I jump in over here.
Right.
And when you've internalized anything, it is there, whether you're doing it or not doing it.
That's right.
So, I mean, I'm thinking, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, ooh, what can I change in my life that I want to change in my life? Like, how can I use these ideas to do that? Because I think you're saying that this is not, I mean, in music, it's linear, meaning it exists through time. But many of the other constructs that I am living out are just like these amorphous, I can't do that, or I could never be like that, or, I'm not that kind of person.
Yeah.
But that can change.
That can change. Because the fact that you even are having the thought, I can't be that kind of person, might tell us that some part of you knows somewhere you are like that. And this phenomena happens to us with people who have qualities we want and with people who have qualities we don't want. It doesn't just happen on the positive side, but when we find ourselves really being repulsed by someone, a really strong kind of emotional reaction that knocks us off center, then somewhere they're mirroring to us some quality in us we don't like, and we've not invited it back into the whole of who we are yet.
or we may be afraid of. We may, like, I know that there are artists who I've been jealous of, and then I get like snarky about it. And in fact, the who they are is something I want.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm scared of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Angela's Arian, who wrote The Fourfold Way, had a beautiful way of talking about it. She said that we are always encountering people as mirrors of ourselves, and that there are three kinds of mirrors we encounter. We encounter clear mirrors, smoking mirrors, and split mirrors. And the clear mirrors are people that we admire and we want to be like, and they're mirroring back qualities to us that we have, but that we've not yet owned, we've not yet developed. That smoking mirrors are people that we want to judge, we want to stay away from, and they're mirroring qualities in us that we've deemed bad or wrong. And so we don't acknowledge them. But psychologically and energetically, when we don't own something, it gets split off, and it actually has more power than when we own it and it's connected to center. And then the third mirror is the split mirror, whereas we both, like these artists, you envied them, you wanted what they had, but you were scared of it. you know. So then it's like you set out to destroy it in yourself or them without realizing it because you're scared of it. But so I think that's a beautiful, I just think that's a beautiful metaphor for what we're talking about. And if we go through our day checking in with ourselves about our reactions to other people and situations, we can learn a lot about ourselves.
Haha, I see. As we react to other things. Now,
As we react to other people. We always think, the ego likes to think, oh, it's all about them. We've learned something about them. But in truth, it's an opportunity to learn something about ourselves.
Do we ever get to the point that we're not interacting with the world as a mirror, but that we get beyond that mirror, we go through the looking glass?
You know, I think we have moments of that. Yeah, I think we have moments of that. And I'm thinking about two things. There's a phrase, moments of meeting. And I think when we have moments of meeting, you know, it's like when you come together with someone and something happens that we often call special or magical. There's a meeting of souls. It's what Martin Buber, the theologian, talked about as the I-thou moment. You know, we encounter someone and who they really are versus the it we make them. So I think it does happen. I think, as Martin Buber said, we can't really live there 24/7 because it would be exhausting. But if we never live there, we're not really living. So yeah, I do think that can happen.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, before we started talking, you had this beautiful encapsulation of like, oh yes, yes, this is deconstruction and impulse, and I of course I don't think you can remember what you said, but maybe you can. You were talking about the integration of the 7 strings.
Right. Right. I think we were talking about recovery, the idea of recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is recovery? Right. And I was talking about it in terms of these split off parts. And I was saying that in the strings, if we look at the string of deconstruction where things get taken apart, they get taken apart, or what alchemy would say, distilled down to their purest essence. Right. So they can then come back together in a form that recovers the wholeness of who they are.
Right. They become, you know, we talked about this early on, or I don't remember the word noumenon. That came to me very early in my life through a game, and which means a thing in itself as separate from its physical appearance, or you may know the word better than I do. And that word has been the word of my life. That has helped me take things apart and understand that things are not necessarily wedded to their physical, how they are physically presenting right now in the world. Right. And so this idea of deconstruction, just like you said, is that when you can separate the thing in itself from how it's presenting physically, then it can re-bloom in any way.
Yes, that's right. Something gets created that's bigger than what you started with. But the recovering does mean allowing room to discover and reconnect with that which has been forgotten or split off or never known. You know, sometimes, like for me, learning to play the harp has been a process of connecting with a part of me that I had not yet known in this lifetime, or at least known consciously.
Well, tell me more about that, because when you talked about that, I never really had a father. So it's at a certain point in my life, I thought, wow, it's like I have this hole, like I just don't have that, or what it means to me is something very different than what it seems to mean to others. But can you tell me what you mean about this thing you'd never known? What did you begin to know?
Well, I think part of, for me, what I'm continuing to begin to know, or knowing in a deeper way, is that there is a resonance deep inside me that I can trust to express in the moment without knowing what it's going to sound like ahead of time. So
that's beautiful. Can we just stop with that? Just say that again. There's a resonance inside you that you can trust. Say that again.
that there's a resonance inside of me that I am discovering that I can trust, that will express itself without me knowing what it is ahead of time.
That's great. That's like a conversation.
Like a conversation. And for me, it's taken me a long time to let myself just sit down at the harp and improvise and just play a chord or string and play something else. Part of it, I think, is because I live with a professional musician and I started learning with him around. I immediately started learning tunes, and it was all about getting the tune right and getting, and so, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what it short-circuited though was that time where, like you talk about when you were a kid and you'd sit down at the piano or the harp and you just see what it sounded like and what it felt like. And so the last year and a half for me really has been about claiming the harp for myself and getting away from trying to learn the tunes and get them right so I can join in with the jams.
Right.
And it's been a very different experience for me and satisfies something so that I can just sit down and say, oh, that one chord really is helping me feel rooted in who I am. Or, wow, I really like the feel of that 6th chord taking me somewhere else. You know, that whatever. And I can get out of judging it as, oh, that's pretty and right, or that isn't. And I know you talk about this a lot with the Strings of Passion and the soundscapes and the things that you've done to help people learn to listen.
Listen while you're playing. Yeah. So
yeah.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's helping me listen to some of my depths where words can't touch. You know, we were talking about this off camera about our pets, and that there's a connection somewhere deep inside that we really cannot get at with words. And I think that ultimately there's a place where that is true with music. And it is a place I think that often gets lost in service of learning the tunes or getting the songs right or getting doing it the way the composer wrote it or the traditional way the song is played or whatever.
I wanted to go back to something you talked about, like when I was a kid and I played the piano, and I identified something when you said this, which is when I was little and I was playing with it before I knew it was a piano.
Yeah.
And what that meant was that it was no different than any of my other toys, and certainly no different than any of my other toys that made noise. And most of my toys were pretty simple, Lincoln Logs and things that got deconstructed and put back together again. I think almost everything I had that aspect to it. That's right. That allowed me to have a relationship with the piano that was happened long before I began to learn that there was even such a thing as music or written music or a way to play a piano or anything. And I do think, I do love to help people get back to that connection to the instrument, your new connection to it, which is your oldest connection to it. And I see it because, sometimes at a show or something, I'll hand my harp to somebody who's never played a harp. And their connection to it is often more connected to it than someone who is learning how to play.
Yes, yeah. Because they're just able to let themselves be with it versus sitting down or holding the harp with all these preconceived ideas of what I'm, quote, supposed to do.
Right, and how to do it correctly.
Yeah, and I just want to segue for a minute to say, so this is part of all of our journey, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, is to learn how to live from the deepest resonance of who we are, instead of moving through the world, living according to all of the learned and internalized expectations of how we're supposed to live and who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do.
Is this where Jung talks about sort of the many versus the individual? I mean, is that
It's a piece of it, yeah. That part of what we do in the process of socialization is we learn to be a certain self or a certain way because of the internalized expectations from parents, caregivers, school, church, peers. And sometimes those learned expectations take us out of who we really are. And so that part of the journey of individuation or coming back to wholeness is again making room for those parts that might have gotten split off, repressed, disowned. So, for instance, lots of times people feel like, well, I should always do what someone asks me to do if they need my help. And so they become these, superhero caregivers to their own detriment, where then their own emotional, mental, and sometimes physical health is suffering. So to be able to back it up and say, okay, just like they say on the airplane, you've got to put your mask on before you help the person next to you. You've got to take care of your needs. You just can't keep giving as if you have no limits or needs. So that would be an example of someone getting a sense of who they are, separate from internalized collective expectations. If there had been the internalization of the expectation to be the caregiver, superhero, accommodator, always putting oneself aside.
I don't know what made me think of this, but as you were talking, I was thinking about what it is like to live for a few minutes without direction. What it is like to meander around, and what we stumble onto in our lives, just in our homes. If you're just meandering around, that's when I find things that were lost and I didn't know where they were.
Right.
That there's something about direction. I mean, it's wonderful to have direction. And, often students will come to my classes because they want to be more creative, but they need direction, or like you said, a program or a system to actually connect with their creativity. And I've been developing those all my life because I needed them. And at the same time, there is those moments of absolute non-direction that, and both of them are so, I think that's what you're saying, or I think that's one of the things that I heard, that as you start collecting the berries of yourself, and putting them in your apron and bringing them, you don't know where they are. You can't go.
And there is a direction inherent in each of those pieces. And this gets back to the first string of impulse, because impulse has with it a direction. Think about it. An impulse is a prompt to move in a direction.
Right.
And Jung says that our psyche, soul, has a direction. The way he says it is that each psyche has a gradient that its libido or life force will follow if left unobstructed. So when you talk about the difference of being non-directional and meandering, what I'm saying to myself is just, it's a meandering that is in the direction of the flow of one's own life force, of one's own psychic energy, of, again, what we might say are the impulses or prompts of the soul, versus, again, impulses or prompts that one is imposing from the ego or learned patterns of, I should be doing that.
This is amazing, because it's helping me see that the practice of music, even with almost no skills, practice of alternating between here's a directed piece and improvisation is allows us to explore that.
Yes.
You're talking about, and it also has helping me understand why, when I was first playing the harp, I gravitated towards a specific structure, which I'm going to call the rondo form. It's a form in music that goes between something very structured, which is the melody or theme, and a period in which there is structure but very little structure. And you alternate between these.
Right.
And I'm realizing how powerful this form is
Mm-hmm.
in exploring our own direction.
Yes.
And I would always think that when I was first learning to improvise, and I learned to improvise on the job. I was playing in restaurants, and I had no repertoire, and I had to make money to pay for the harp, and I had to do it. And I saw this form in classical music, and I was like, I'm going to take that. And what I saw about the form is that it had a safe place where I could make it sound like I knew what I was doing. That was the theme. And then there was the open space where I could explore. And when I got lost or felt that someone thought I was lost, I could go back and reassert that piece of music that would make it sound like I knew what I was doing. And then I would go off on the next adventure. But as you're talking, I'm thinking that this form, then this isn't just in the idea of structure, this form of structured, highly structured thing that is easy to see, followed by unstructured thing or slightly structured thing, followed by, that is a beautiful formula for exploring ourselves.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about, like, even with the caregiver, most people who are caregivers, they do care. And so they want to be able to give. And it's like, okay, how do they do that but allow the space again to give for themselves, to have the limits and boundaries, so that it's both and. And right before you started talking about the rondo form, my mind went to that again, that we all need an ego. You know, our ego is our sense of, this is who I am. And we need an ego. All of the kinds of practices that say ego is bad or wrong, I disagree with. Now, the ego can, usurp places that don't belong to it, but the ego gives us a cohesive sense of who we are. That's the structure. We need a cohesive sense of who we are, so we feel safe enough to explore these parts of ourselves that are being recovered, that we're just getting to know. And that if we don't have a cohesive sense of self that we trust, then we're going to hold on and defend against anything we don't know.
All right. So how does that look? Okay. So what does that look like with a caregiver?
Well, I think that, for instance, caregivers often deny their own needs. I mean, you ask them what they need and they can't tell you. And then you check in with their daily schedule and they're skipping meals, they're, canceling their own self-care appointments, they're giving up the practices that they need to stay centered. And, they aren't even aware of the toll it's taking on them.
Interesting. So if they were to add this idea of the rondo form to their lives, it would be taking care, really investing in taking care in the structured way of someone else, and then some kind of an open area in which they are exploring or feeding themselves,
right,
followed then by this going back into the more structured form.
Right. And it could be, for instance, that they give themselves an afternoon off or a night away if they're a caregiver of someone who's requiring 24/7. And again, or it could be the ardent helper who, when the next time they're asked to take a meal to a shut-in, they say, I can't do it this week. That they allow themselves the space to not give to another in order to take care of themselves. I want to just say, I don't think we have time to go on the tangent, but it's just worth noting, the reason people don't do that is because then they feel guilty. Because whenever we begin to reclaim parts of ourselves that we've been told were bad or wrong, we often experience guilt. Because the guilt is part of the conditioning that contributes to the part staying split off.
So that might be an actual subject for one of our discussions, is is guilt and the self, or how
yeah, guilt and the self, because and it's applicable again to music, because part of my hesitancy about joining in sessions and just doing chording for songs I don't know is that I would feel guilty. I would get it wrong. So suppose I hit the wrong chord at the wrong time, then I feel guilty. Then I feel ashamed. Now we're getting guilt and shame, and then I'm paralyzed. And so the other thing I want to say is I think that part of what we all have to do in our lives to live the fullness of who we are, and what we have to do as musicians, is we do really have to look at where guilt and shame get triggered and how that blocks us. And we have to find a way to be compassionate with ourselves in those places,
And I'm assuming that that's part of where your work comes in, because
yes.
finding a way to become compassionate is no simple task. It's
right. It's a life's work. I mean, it's a life's work, but it's probably the most important thing we can do.
Because is it important because then we are starting to bring more of who we are into the resonance of how we are in the world?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if we want to go a little, I was going to say woo-woo or kind of spiritual. I mean, I think it ultimately is that love allows things to evolve and to grow. And for me, my current working definition of love is compassionate presence. That what does it mean to love? It means to have compassionate presence. So if I can have compassionate presence with a part of me that feels guilt and shame that I might not get the right chord at the right time,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe I can say, okay, well, let's ground myself here. And what can I do? So maybe I'm just going to play really softly until I feel more confident it's at the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'm just going to stick with the one chord, which never is going to really sound that out of place.
Right. Or I might suggest, if I was thinking about music, just a couple of things I would think. Well, play up high, because the higher you play, the less you are defining what other people are doing.
Okay.
Harmonically. And try one note instead of a whole chord. Try one note until you start feeling confident with that note, and then start adding another one.
Those are great. So, but if I get caught in the guilt and shame, I can never get to that step. So, and so if I'm caught in guilt and shame, then I need to take an afternoon, a day, a week off. I mean, I've been in private practice for 30 years. So I've had to deal with my own guilt that, okay, I'm going to say to my clients and analysis, okay, I'm not available for 2 weeks, if they're seeing me weekly or twice a week.
Right.
It's like we have to make space to deal with our own limitations. And the paradox is, when we deal with our limitations, then we can move towards our largesse. Paradox, both in who we are as a person and who we are as a musician.
Well, you said right in the beginning something about we have to actually we can't address the things that are in our way by walking away from them.
That's right.
Because they're in there.
That's right.
The only way that we can address them is by actually, and I don't know why I'm suddenly thinking of this this principle. I don't even know anything about it in biology or physics or something, that, when you have something that they put it in your body and it'll attract the negative things to it. That you actually almost have to go in there and attract those things so that you can look at them. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, no, but I think what I would say is compassionate presence allows those things to come into consciousness. And then as they come into consciousness, they can begin to be integrated. And then they have less power. So we could say that thing that you put in is the compassionate presence. Or love.
Oh, and then that pulls it. And when you were talking now, I was thinking, like when you go into the woods and you just sit there really quietly, and then the animals come.
Yes.
Then.
Yes, that's great. That is.
And
great.
If you don't want the animals to come, make a lot of noise.
That's right.
Wow. There's so much. There's so much in this session that I want to go back and ask about. And And I don't even know that we did the, the thing that we said we wanted to take, how to, but what I think this is saying to me is that when you start looking at any of this, recovery, resonance, creativity, all the stuff that Jung spent his life looking at, it's infinite.
Yes.
That can bring in every single part of what you're looking at.
Absolutely.
So Kathleen, I invite you to have at least one other session to do this again and look again at what happens when we start looking at the integration of all these strings.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely.
Right, good. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for, I have so much to think of from this. And if you were to tell people, I know this was a wide-ranging session, but if you were going to give people one thing, if I were going to give people one thing to do, I would say, I would approach it from a musical or a sound standpoint and say, make sound with something, anything, whether it's an instrument or whether it's a cup, and be both listening and doing it at the same time, and just see what that's like, and how it then can allow you to have the moment of doing and experiencing at the moment. Because I believe for me, that is, as a performer, that's been the peak moments for me, when I am doing and experiencing, or what you said, Kathleen, that when you're trusting yourself enough that, I can't remember how you said it, but I saw it, that you're doing what you're doing without having decided what's coming out. Yes. Or what needs to come out. And I think that is the experience of doing and listening, or playing and listening, which is so much at the heart of actually being a human being, or being a musician in a moment. Yeah, that's what I would tell people to do, and you can do it with anything. And sound is great. And if you're deaf, then I would just say do it with another, sense. Do it with feeling. So that you're feeling both the touching and the feeling at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that my one thing to circle back to say that if you want to practice one thing, practice going through your day, looking at where do you encounter clear mirrors, smoky mirrors, and split mirrors. And then invite that part of you to make itself known to you with a compassionate presence.
That's beautiful. And let me ask you something. So once again, help us to know when we're seeing a clear mirror, when we're seeing a smoky mirror, and when we're seeing a split mirror.
The clear mirror is when we see someone that we admire or we want to be like, and they are mirroring to us qualities that are in us, but we've not yet owned or developed. The smoky mirror is someone that we feel repulsed by, or we move into judgment about, or we feel irritated with, and they're mirroring to us qualities in ourselves that we don't like, but we don't have a conscious relationship to. And the split mirror is someone that we both admire, but we're a little scared of. It's like we kind of want to be like them, but we're not quite sure. And they are mirroring to us a quality that we want, but that we're scared of, that we're ambivalent.
And what might we feel how might we identify that we're seeing that? Might we feel like denigrating or something?
Yes, I think often the split mirror, sometimes how you think, oh, I really want to get to know that person. And then you think, oh, but so-and-so and so-and-so about them. Okay. It's like you're both drawn to them, but you find yourself dismissing them and moving away.
Got it. Okay. So dismissiveness. Okay, great.
Yeah. So.
And was there one other thing I interrupted you that you wanted to say about love?
No, I think if you practice, if you go through your day for the next 21 days and check in with yourself and, at lunchtime and in the evening with, okay, where have I encountered clear mirrors, smoky mirrors, and split mirrors, you're going to be busy, and I'm going to be busy. We're going to be really seeing more of who we are vis-a-vis how we respond to other people. And the seeing of it compassionately begins that process of integration, which is organic.
That's beautiful. And I love how that connects to the listening, the hearing of yourself as you're making that sound without judgment. The
Yeah.
actual, the just hearing. Yeah. That's
Yes.
beautiful.
And to tie it back to the string, for me, that is the liftoff
Mm.
where we can be with, so we go through the other strings, impulse through deconstruction, but then we trust that something's going to happen.
Right.
That in the moment, again, is bigger than any of what we've done, that we have ideas about, but that we also realize it's going to have a life of its own because we've tended it. So there's an integration that happens there that's organic.
Right. And when we trust that what we've learned so far, and just to tell people the strings again, the first is impulse, the second is structure, the third is character, the fourth is roles, which is how we are able to do things with other people as well as parts of ourselves. Then the role of practices and practicing, and we've talked about all of these. And the sixth is the role of deconstruction or distillation, or we break it down. And then finally, liftoff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Kathleen, thank you. I have loved this, and I'm really looking forward to moving forward with it as well.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.